The non-constituency member of parliament scheme, the NCMP scheme, has been called by former Prime Minister, current Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong, as a stabilizer in our political system. Recently, a couple of authors, Jong, whom I have had on before, and he was a former NCMP from the WP, and Loke, published a book on the NCMPs, and it has been a bestseller already. And today we will be discussing the scheme, whether it has outlived its utility, its shelf life, whether there is still a place for it in our current political system. So I'll have JJ on first because Yeong is going through some technical difficulties. He is in London now.
Hello, hi.
Yes, hi. Okay, we made it. Okay, yes. So Yeong will join us
Good.
in a bit. So I just wanted to congratulate you first and foremost. So the book is behind you, right? Can you? Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's
So
here.
yes, so it's your second best-selling book. So well done.
Thank you.
So could you share a little bit about the book? Why you wanted to write it? Why you think it's important?
Oh, first, I got this invitation from the publisher, World Scientific, which also published my first book, Journey in Blue. They mentioned that there is a book on the nominated member of parliament scheme, and then it would be good to have a similar book that is on the NCMP scheme. And we thought that since it was coming to the 40th anniversary of the book, of the scheme, it'll be a good time to actually take stock of the scheme itself. And also, there's actually been nothing written about this scheme formally as a book. There have been some talks here and there. Every January elections, we hear about it, but there has been no formal book written about it. So we thought it was a good time to take stock of the history of the scheme, and then also to ask the questions, what's next? Because it has been 40 years since the scheme, and also incidentally 40 years since the opposition first won any seat in the general election proper. So it'll be a good time to look at it vis-a-vis the entire political setting in Singapore.
Okay, so could you take us through the history a little? And of course, I've read the book, so I mean, I know a little bit. Could you take us the history because you've done a lot of research
Sure.
on this?
Although I think Yeong, which is my co-author, is in a better position to do it because he wrote most of the parts about the history of the scheme, and he's quite an authority on opposition politics history as well, having written a couple of books on that.
And I
But
think
while Yeong is
I wanted to say his books on the opposition was superb, like really superb. I
okay,
enjoyed it so
you
much.
you can tell him and he managed to come on live later. All right, so yeah, so basically the scheme was started in 1984. Then there was a big debate over it, and the gist of it is that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew felt that because back then Mr. JBJ managed to win in Anson in a by-election, and then he felt that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew felt that it would be good to have opposition members come in, even if they didn't win the elections, to become like sparring partners for the ministers and also for the backbenchers. So that was how the scheme originally started, and it started with a maximum of up to 6, but it never got to there. There's always been 3. So the initial batch, everybody rejected it because there was a strong opposition from the opposing side that this scheme basically sort of like it's not a real opposition, and then it might dissuade voters from voting in the real opposition. So so then there was a second change of the scheme that was just before the 2011 elections. That's how I got in, because the number was increased from 3 to 9 of the if they are, I mean, to guarantee at least 9 members from the opposition in.
9 minus X, where X equals elected members of opposition members of parliament.
Correct. So in 2011, that was when there were 6 elected opposition members from Aljunied and Hougang. So Gerald, myself, and Lina Cham got in. Then there was a next change of the scheme, which was after the 2015 election, and then it took place in 2020 only when it became 12. And then that also happened to be when the opposition won the second GRC. So there were 10 elected members of opposition members of parliament, and of which there were 2 remaining seats, which are taken by the PSP NCMPs now, Hazel and Manwai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, Lee Kuan Yew gave 3 reasons, right? One was to sharpen the debating skills of the PAP MPs. The other was to show that the opposition actually is not that great and it's a myth that we need them. And the third is to dispel any suspicion of a government cover-up. Is that right?
Um, all right. I mean, the first point I already touched about it. I think Ho Yeong is trying to join in, is asking you
Yeah,
some questions. Okay.
I
But
said,
meanwhile, based on, one of the reason was the sparring thing, that they needed more opposition members to spar. And of course, they wanted to show that we are not that great. So, but I think that is for people to decide. I think that the opposition members have done credibly, whether they were elected properly or through the NCMP schemes. And in fact, I would think that in subsequently raising it to 9 and to 12, I think the government, the PAP, did acknowledge that the performances of the NCMPs who had been elected previously had been decent, and therefore they wanted to increase that scheme as well. And what was your third point again? Sorry.
dispel any suspicion of a government cover-up.
Cover up, I think also because then they, in the reasons that were stated earlier, when the first scheme came about, then it is so that there'll be at least always some opposition members who can question the government on cases such as corruptions or any dealings that they think that it is not done properly, and therefore the opposition should raise it up in parliament. So with a guarantee of at least some seats in parliament, then that guarantee can be fulfilled.
Okay. So that's the history, right? So on all 3, you probably disagree with the government, and I think I agree with you, as in, disagree with Lee Kuan Yew that it was to show how bad the opposition was, because in fact, one could very well say that that became a training ground for a lot of MPs, right, including yourself. But perhaps more pertinently would be people like Sylvia, Gerald, and Leon, who eventually became elected members of parliament.
Yeah, so definitely the being in parliament itself is quite different from watching it, and when you are part of the live debate and so on. So I think the good thing being in parliament is that you definitely get a lot of exposure, you get a lot of airtime, the reporters will come to you, versus that you're not in. So, and then you do have parliament stage to hold the government accountable, and the party also can better evaluate its members, so that at the next election, if there's a need to do some shuffling around where to put the people. So definitely, as having been an NCMP, the parliament experience is useful. And I added in the book that it's actually no different from the parliament experience that any MPs would have, other than a little bit shorter speaking time and a couple of other things. In my time, we couldn't vote on some matters, but that has been removed. And honestly, I think that doesn't matter anyway, because even though we couldn't vote on some matters, but we can speak on those matters. So it wasn't any big deal. So, but to answer your point is, yes, the exposure is useful.
Okay. So you mentioned something interesting. You said that this is also a test for your own party to show that you are capable, you are good enough.
Um, Well, I don't think anybody starts by saying that I want to prove that I'm good enough or whatever. When I was there, there's definitely a big responsibility on all our shoulders. Having gone in the 2011 general election, which was quite a landmark election, it's the first time a GRC was broken through, and the whole team, the MPs as well as the NCMPs of the opposition side, wanted to be very sure that um, we handle this platform properly, because it's also you're being put in the spotlight. So, okay, great.
Hey, Hoyong, finally.
Hi, Walid.
Yes,
My apologies for joining late
no
because of
problem.
technical issues. At least I'm not giving a lecture about IT resilience.
Yes, yes. Our smart nation, right? Yeah. So we were just going through the history of the NCMP scheme, and JJ was giving his own experience and sharing his own experience, and I was asking whether it's also a test for their own parties, right? So JJ went in as an NCMP, and whether that is a test to the WP. I mean, for him to show to the WP that he is good enough for this. Sorry, JJ, to continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so to continue on the point is that I think we handled it decently well, and subsequently, even in the subsequent ones, 2015 and also in the 2020, you can see that the oppositions have gotten the hang of the parliament procedures and so on, and they're using the platform a lot more, so you see more motions being filed. Like, for example, when I was there, we weren't really filing motions a lot. In fact, I don't think, yeah, there was probably none in my time, but we did file a few adjournment motions. I was the first to file an adjournment motion so that we have more speaking time to spotlight some issues. But I think as the time went on, the opposition became more and more confident on how to use the parliament platform. And you can even see in the PSP today that they're using this platform quite often.
Yeah, I thought, I'm sure you followed the EBRC debate. I
Yes,
thought
I did.
probably the PSP's strongest performance in Parliament, at least one of the strongest performances I've seen from them in the past 4 years. So Hoyong, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew outlined three reasons, right, which I mentioned just now for the NCMP. Do you think he has been proven wrong on at least one of them?
Well, the way to train the PAP MPs to deal with the opposition is to let the opposition MPs come in through the natural ways to, not have all these, very high barriers and, media coverage and all that. Which brings us back to the point of the NCMP scheme, right? Which is that it is for the PAP to let the opposition in a very controlled fashion, right? This is something we're very familiar with in Singapore style of governance. But I guess my point, which I share in the book and also more generally, is that this is a unique scheme, NCMP scheme in the world. Although there's some, they took after Mauritius, the example of Mauritius, and with unique schemes like this, you get very unique issues and problems also. And one of the problems, if I may, looking at history, is that if this situation where the opposition was forced to criticize the scheme when it first came out in 1984, that this is not democratic, this is not legitimate, we must earn our seats in the right way. But then eventually they're forced to accept the seats for reason of real politics. On the side of PAP, they have been trying to cajole the opposition to, you must take up NCMP seats. This is what we have in Singapore. But then when they actually do, they get the sense to the opposition that they are in by the grace of the PAP, and I'm just not sure this is the best way to build a healthy democracy.
Okay, so but what's wrong with opposing a scheme but still accepting it, opposing it in principle but accepting the position? What's fundamentally wrong about that? Isn't that what happens in politics all the time?
That's true. However, this is a scheme where the opposition parties are sort of forced to say, do you accept this scheme or not? Will you take it up if presented before polling day, right? Sort of it's a challenge that the PAP throws at the opposition. Will you take up the seat if you are eventually offered it? And the opposition wants to be voted in outright. They don't want to go in by so-called the back door, although we can come to that a bit later. So they say they'll try to be a bit vague, but then they will eventually accept this. So I just don't think this is the best way, I think, to build trust, with voters, with different stakeholders in the democracy.
Okay, so can I
Yeah,
just
maybe I just add on to here is that I'll give another example. So, for example, we oppose the GRC scheme, but it doesn't mean that then
Yeah.
we don't contest in any
Right.
GRCs at all, because
right.
like it or not, this is the part of the politics of Singapore. So, pass through Parliament is in our constitution. So then it is up to the individuals who are involved to see if they wish to basically take up the scheme. Yeah, but I don't see any irony in opposing a scheme and then still participate in it, because otherwise we wouldn't be in Aljunied or Sengkang or East Coast or Marine Parade.
Same. I agree as well. So okay, so maybe let's talk about the present, right? So just one word answer from you two first before we elaborate. So do you think the scheme should stay, JJ?
I put into the book the conclusion. It's a very definite
One word.
conclusion. Yeah, that it's time to actually move away from this scheme. All right. I'm totally okay to have it dropped. But I think what we also put in the conclusion, that we should also look at ways of making our democratic process fairer. So of course you have the huge debate over this EBRC. The EBRC is one of the matter. Yeah, of course there's also the whole thing about GRC systems and also this unfair access to, say, the People's Association resources and so on. These are things that we definitely need to look into. But I'm not saying that we need to tie that to just the NCMP scheme. For me, I feel that we have come to a stage in which, well, 40 years ago, it could be quite different, because it was very, very difficult for the opposition to go in, even on one seat, right? So we had for so long just 2 elected seats, toggling between 1 and 2 before the final breakthrough in 2011. So today, I think the opposition has gathered some momentum. There's some template that's being shown on how it can work. So I think it's best to focus going forward how to get elected opposition members in, rather to have this training wheel of the NCMP scheme to feel that, Singapore is safe, in the sense that we'll always be guaranteed some opposition in Parliament. I feel that I call this a training wheel. It's time to let it come off.
Okay. So your one word answer is yes, it should go.
Yes.
Yes, Ho Young?
One word answer: yes, it should go.
Okay, so I think it shouldn't, right? So I would say no. So let's have a debate, right? So my question to you is, why does it need to go if the matter will sort itself out, right? The matter will sort itself out. If we have 12 or more, we don't need this scheme anyway. But if we don't, this is good, because if we value having opposition in parliament, then what do we lose by having this scheme? And so that's the first thing. And in 2020, the PAP made it a point of their campaigns to say that you don't need to vote for the opposition because you already have the NCMP scheme. Yet that didn't work for voters, and voters voted against them whenever in the constituencies that were relevant. So that means it doesn't deter people from voting for the opposition. So isn't this a win-win for the opposition, considering that people like Sylvia probably wouldn't be as prominent as she is if not for the NCMP scheme? I think Gerald and Yeong have, to different degrees, benefited from it as well. I think JJ has benefited from it. It's hard to see. Maybe only Lina Chiam didn't really utilize it as much as the position allowed. So what's the downside to having it?
So Walid,
I think,
sorry, after you, JJ.
okay, Ho Young, you go first.
Okay, so Walid, you made a good point that the scheme can just remain there, it doesn't activate it unless needed. That is, if there's zero opposition in Parliament. But also, in what you just said in there, right? The PAP can just say, and it has been saying every election since '94, don't worry, vote for the PAP because you will still be guaranteed, 3 as it was back then, and now 12 opposition MPs at the minimum through the NCMP scheme. And that then brings us to the issue: what is the purpose of an election? Election is when all parties present a manifesto that is then voted upon by voters, and they seek to win the mandate. The PAP would also think this way, to seek to win the mandate for their manifesto, right? And when you say something like, actually, it doesn't matter anymore, you will still be guaranteed the 3 or the 12 NCMP, so just vote for the PAP. Then it begs the question, what is the purpose of the election? This may be very abstract, maybe something for political scientists to mull about, but it is what is at the heart of the matter, I think.
But if they have said that, but voters do not react to it, so your opposition to it is a philosophical opposition, or sorry, a principled position rather.
It is, yes, in a way, a principled opposition. It is a bit of a philosophical issue, right? But then, if we talk about what is this scheme supposed to achieve, and what the PAP says for one reason, the opposition says for a different reason, then I think what we have is not the best condition to build trust and a healthy democracy.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay,
Jason?
for me, having been active participant in elections, so basically it's quite irritating to have to deal with this sort of things, because the PAP will always come out and says, look, you don't need to vote the opposition. Opposition don't say anything about it, right? Because we have to say that, no, this is not proper and so on. And then there's so much time wasted. I don't feel that that is a proper way that Singapore's democracy should go forward. I feel that we should focus on building what is a credible alternative one day should PAP fail, or if the people want a alternative, then I think we should just build on it. And, and the very fact that the PAP, even up to the last elections, and of course every elections before then, has been always throwing out the scheme and saying that you don't need to elect the opposition, I feel that it reflects a mindset that they want absolute dominance. They want us to go back to the old days where the opposition can't even win a single seat, which, somehow we suspect that is, of all the stated intentions, that the real intention is that they rather have it back to the day that they have absolute dominance of parliament, 100%, right? And no problem, the opposition can always come back in through the back door. So I feel that this is not a healthy way to take our democracy going forward. We're already 59 years, of independence, longer if you count the elections before independence. So I feel that we basically need to build up what is a proper way to go forward in our democracy, rather than to rely on this sort of insurance.
Okay, so yeah, the NCMP is really an insurance, right? But I assume both of you buy life insurance also.
More for the savings purposes.
So isn't it good to have political insurance also? So I guess the question I have is, if let's say we remove this, would you be comfortable with a situation where there's no opposition?
Yeah, so back to this thing about insurance, I want to pick on your point. I feel that the best insurance is to actually have a credible, reliable opposition. Imagine, for example, if one day the PAP cannot function and the opposition is like nowhere in sight, and then suddenly you have to build up a team that is going to take over. That's not going to work. It takes a long time to build up this, and it is good to build it while Singapore is having a relative stability and so on. Then you have a ability to determine the type of opposition that you want, that will be able to be that's electable by the people. So I feel that this is a much better insurance than the NCMP insurance.
So
the second point is,
sorry, please, please carry on.
The second point is, am I okay if it's totally none? I think that's what the people choose then.
Okay.
So continue the insurance analogy, right? As we know, not all insurance claims get paid out in full. but anyway, I think there's if I'm just interested in your point, right? There's another way to think of it. So imagine if the PAP loses power, and let's just say hypothetically, the Workers' Party forms the government. Will it abolish the NCMP scheme? I think that's the question, and therefore let the PAP benefit from the NCMP scheme by entering Parliament from quote unquote the back door, right? And people cynics may argue, yes, the WP may hypothetically abolish the NCMP scheme, which means that this NCMP scheme is really a political football rather than some sort of political culture or constitutional measure.
Okay, fair enough. So, we are always asked that question a lot. What would the WP do if they are in power? I don't really find that to be a useful point of discussion, because they are not in power and they are nowhere near in power, right? So we deal with what we have at this point in time. So I think that the two of you have made a case for a good case for its removal. I think. What was Professor Woon's argument as well? He believes it should be abolished as well, and then the system should be changed, right? The
No,
electoral system.
actually, Walter Woon's argument in the book is that it should stay. This is part of Singapore's political culture, and there are many other ways to elect, your politicians aside from just first past the post.
Okay. So he thinks the NCMP should stay alongside changing the first past the post.
No, he argues for NCMP scheme to stay, but
Yes, it
he
is.
makes a comment about whether or not first past the post should be amended.
Okay, got it. Okay, all right. Okay, so who else in the book disagrees with you or agrees with you?
Well, the first point to note, I think, is that there has been very little consensus amongst opposition parties, political observers like yourself and Walter Woon and the PAP too. Everyone has a different opinion as to how it should be, which was, I think, back to my point, if I may one more last time, which is that it's a very confused scheme. I agree with the insurance benefit of the NCMP scheme, but it's a very confused scheme. What is it for? What's it meant to do? What's its purpose?
Right. I think the NCMP and the NMP, these two schemes are quite undemocratic. In fact, the NMP I think is even more undemocratic because it's quite an elitist scheme. It's a bunch of elites choosing another bunch of elites. But I think the overall net effect could be democratic, even if the process wasn't. That's the way I see this. So I think you're right. I think on the philosophical part, on the principle part, I agree with you. I think that it does compromise democracy. But if it produces democratic outcomes, given the system we have, given the dominant one-party system we have, would that be such a bad thing?
I think you made a good point, Walid. Sorry if I may just before you go, JJ, and some of our contributors like Eugene Tan, and I think yourself too, Walid, have said that if obviously if the opposition, in this case, let's say a WP or a PSP, gets 50% of the seats, then there's really no need for the NCMP scheme, and perhaps that's the point threshold by which we then finally say we all agree that's when we abolish the NCMP scheme.
So what when the opposition gets 50% of the vote?
I think it's just some of the comments, and of course, I think I would encourage the readers to go and read the books itself because there are so many different views from so many different people. So there are some interesting suggestions. Of course, one of which is to go to proportional representation. Then you don't need a scheme like that. The other one is that, like Eugene was mentioning, that once you cross a certain threshold, I believe it's not 50, but it's probably like 25 or 30. I can't remember what's the percentage. That if the opposition is clearly able to cross this mark, then it's a sunset clause. You totally abolish the scheme automatically. Yeah, because I think we are not trying to go back to the older times where this scheme is really needed when it's such a dominant single party, right? So, in my opinion, I don't think this is a good replacement for first past the post. Of course, there are pro and cons of first past the post, but I don't feel that the NCMP scheme is a reasonable replacement for that.
Okay. So both of you are in favor of the GRC, or you want to be pure SMCs?
That would be a new book, Walid.
Okay.
I think, Walid, you can write the book on that. Yeah, I can give comments on that when your book is you're writing your book.
I await that book. Sorry, I couldn't be as involved with this. It was just scheduling. I would have loved to be a third author on this, but okay. So thank you. Because the reason why I asked about the GRC is And JJ, you have referenced this quite a bit because this is part of the larger ecosystem of our electoral system, right? And you mentioned the EBRC, which I'm totally in agreement with. The media, maybe you can even extend election campaigning time, I think even some basic things, right? Like announcement of the EBRC when we don't need a PQ to parliamentary question to know, right? I think giving 3 months as the PSP suggested, I think is reasonable. So simple things like that. But the GRC is far more fundamental to our electoral system than the NCMP or the NMP, right? It's the core of our electoral system.
Okay, so back to your question. Firstly, I have to qualify. I forgot to qualify at the beginning that I'm here as the author of the book, right? Although I'm still a member of the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party has made its stand quite clear about the GRC system, that it wants it abolished. That's in the manifesto. Yeah, but of course, there's always this question about the racial representations and so on. There are other ways of handling this, like Mauritius have their way. Interestingly, using the NCMP scheme to find a solution for racial representation. Then but I personally feel that the problem with the GRC thing is that when it started off as a three-man GRCs, later it kept ballooning to much bigger, becomes a convenient tool for lack of a better word, gerrymandering, which is the hot word these days because of that parliament motion that was just passed just a few days ago. Yeah, because it becomes a very convenient tool to say, here is a strong minister, this is a strong ward, a very solid vote bank, so I can easily absorb any SMCs into this that's giving me trouble. So to the extent that what maybe started as, if we go back to the intentions of the PAP and say it was good intentions that we need racial representations. But I feel that something that is good intentions, ultimately, when it becomes a convenient tool for them to maneuver it, to even gerrymander with it, then it becomes a drug. It becomes a drug that the more you get to use it, you feel more shocked, and then you say, let's try it and try it in a different way. So I feel that let's look at what is really needed. If the GRC is about racial representation, then we find other solutions for that, rather than to use the GRC system and then combine with things like very short notice from the EBRC report to actual elections and all that. It really disrupts the opposition, because if you want to run a serious campaign and you treat elections and our democratic process seriously, then I think we need to give proper time for the proper democratic processes to take place.
So I agree with you that good intentions by themselves are not enough, right? I never understood why that should be even debated, right? Like, because the road to hell is filled with good intentions, right? And something can always start with good intentions. But so if you are against the GRC, and then you say find other ways, but you're against the NCMP also, which is Mauritius' way of dealing with racial representation. So what would be a system for you that will guarantee it?
I mean, I haven't thought very. I mean, there have been various ways, of course. The proportional representation is one. Then, because it also depends on those who are on the party list, the party can actually choose to balance it. I mean, there are many ways, but I haven't given a big study on it, right? So
the party
basically,
can just put people, right? Like, so let's say the PAP puts a Malay, then it's convention for the opposition to put a Malay and in an SMC. Yeah.
Of course, that one it becomes when it's SMC is dedicated to a particular race, But I think there have been quite a few arguments against that as well. So I don't know if today we should be spending so much time to talk about the GRC system and the racial representation thing.
All right. Okay.
So I think maybe very
please.
quickly, Walid, I take a slightly different view. I think on the GRC system, I think it's the best possible solution to the issue of ethnic minority representation. And I approach all these issues as a political historian, right? I look at it as a historian. I think all this should be seen as part of the slew of constitutional innovations that we saw in the transition from the PAP old guard to the second generation of the PAP leaders. I believe, having looked through all these, select committee discussion and so on, it is not I'm not saying it's an entirely bad system. More likely than not, it is a mix of that, and if it could usefully introduce some hindrances for the opposition, why not? And on the GRC system, there was really no other better alternative that was being discussed, and none of the alternatives made sense, even for the people who were fighting for greater ethnic minority representation. Granted that we have in the background schemes such as the ethnic quota policy, in H2B flats and all that. That's the background, of course.
Yeah, indeed. I am in agreement with Ho Yeong, although I think one of the compromises is, which I hope to see in my lifetime, is we have a maximum of 2% GRCs. Because if it's really about minority representation, I don't think we need more than 2%. And then half of the seats could be just SMCs, right? And then you'll have a more competitive, democratic electoral arena. Okay, so JJ, but also Ho Yeong, based on your own research, are NCMPs less respected by the public, or does the public does? I think the public sees Leong Man Wai more than some WP MPs, right? Like Herting Ru or Dennis. The public sees Leong Man Wai more. So are NCMPs less respected by the public, you think?
Well, I think Jong has done a lot of respectable work and is definitely respected by people on the ground, as I can observe for myself too. But I guess also that look, I think most people can't really tell the difference between NCMPs and the full MPs, right?
Yeah.
And in the same way, some people don't know who the MPs are,
Yeah.
because of call it what. But that's a different issue, right? So I don't think most people can actually tell the difference.
Right.
And if you add MP to the mix, that even confuses them further. What they see is opposition and PAP. That's what they see.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward for me to comment on other people, So, but I would just say that for myself, I think, of course, there's a lot of respect that people have that, firstly, we took this route to, it's a difficult road to contest against a very dominant ruling party. So, and of course, when it comes to parliament, there's no difference. The party divided. When I was there, we basically divided up the different ministries to different people to look after. I was looking after three fairly large ministries to tackle the issues on that. I think if you look at the record, the NCMPs have always been very active. In fact, the most active usually in parliament for every parliament term. So because basically they need to make a point. And even Lina Cham, you mentioned earlier, she was actually very active during her time speaking in parliament. She was sitting just next to me and Gerald. So I think all the NCMPs have been putting very hard work in parliament itself. So as to how people perceive it, I think it's for others. But our aim is ultimately, if we are coming back again for the next elections, to try to win it. And that is always the biggest problem for NCMPs. You find the ground will be most likely floated away.
Mm. So the problem is that sorry, please, Ho Yeong. Yeah.
So just a very quick point. This is slightly facetious, but I think there's a sense, a bit misguided, that because the NCMPs have no constituency to look after, they have more time to speak up in parliament. Of course, that's not totally true. They also, walk the ground to campaign. But as JJ pointed out, he, along with his two fellow NCMPs in the parliament session that he was sitting in, were the most active, and I think they did contribute a lot to our national discussions as a result.
So do you think Gerald and Leon and Sylvia benefited from their NCMP stints?
But by virtue of the fact that they got elected as a full MP, right?
Yeah. So eventually they became elected. So is it a conveyor belt, or is it makes you more likely to be elected, you think?
That could be a tricky question for JJ, so maybe let me take a step first. For each of those MPs you have just mentioned, aside from Sylvia, right, they did not win in the constituency that they became the NCMP from, right? So Leon is from East Coast GRC, and then he became the MP of Aljunied GRC, fully elected, right? So I think it's not the fact that having become NCMPs, they became they had more traction on the ground in that constituency, but nationally they got that more exposure, and people know who they were, and they've heard them speak in parliament. So Singapore's a very small country, right? It's just a small electorate. It doesn't really matter which constitution they are in. People can get the same source of news.
Right. So the name recognition, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think earlier I mentioned that when you asked the earlier question whether there's profile, yes, definitely there's a national profile. So it's up to each individual. And also, of course, winning election is not just about one person. It's actually about the whole party branding. In fact, I would say that the party brand is actually even more important than individual. So I think overall, because you're looking at the Workers' Party that managed to find a way to break through the PAP dominance. I think during the book launch itself last month, I credited Mr. Lau Kia Kiang for having made that breakthrough, because it's one thing to be a member of parliament to push very hard, like Mr. JBJ was doing that too, Mr. Cham Sitong was doing that too. But I think the tough thing is, how do you then build a team and bring it along with you? So I think you look at things as a team-wise, and then, of course, when the team is moving well, then the NCMPs and other, not necessarily NCMPs too. I mean, if you look at Sengkang, there's no recognized political name there other than He Ting Ru, who was running with me in Marine Parade in 2015. The rest have actually no political experience at all. So it's, I think you have to look at it in the context of the party rather than individual persons.
So I agree that the party matters more than the person. But the fact that the WP moved Gerald and Leon to Aljunied shows that the WP also think that individuals matter, right? If not, they could have just stayed in East Coast. It wouldn't have mattered if it's only about party branding.
I think the whole thing, if you looked at it in totality of the whole party, the party needs people, and you move people. I mean, it's just like any organizations. You run an organization and you think that there is a vacancy that is being created because of people stepping down or other reasons. Then you basically try to move your talents around to fill wherever is needed. So I think that is all part and parcel of building a party brand.
Okay. Ho Young, you wanted to say something?
Yes, maybe I add a new angle for us to think about. Singapore is different from, say, the UK, which is where the Westminster system comes from, where you elect your town councillors. In Singapore, that's not happened since the 1950s, right? It's a very high stakes game. You either get elected to national life, which is member of parliament, or nothing at all. You don't elect your councillors, at least not the general electorate. What this means is that there is no, to put it a bit crudely, but again, no offense to any parties, there's no sort of career progression, right, for politicians. They either make it to MP or they do not. It's a very high stakes game. And I think what the NCMP scheme has therefore played a role in, that we've just been discussing, is a way of testing the candidates of a certain party and give them a way to work up politics in Singapore. Albeit that there's only been 12 NCMPs in our history.
Right. So, and I didn't realize the number was so small until you guys wrote about it and mentioned it. Like, it's a pretty small number.
Fit into the cover of a book.
Exactly. As opposed to the NMPs, right, which was introduced at the same time.
No, it was even later. The NMP was introduced later.
Yes, so they were all discussed at the same time, all of this, but it was introduced even later. But there's far more NMPs than NCMPs. So it's really fascinating stuff. So, okay. So, Ho Young, your last statement, right, seems like you're making the case for the NCMP scheme.
Well, I was really looking at all ways at the scheme. In total, I think the scheme should go, and for the reasons that we discussed here and also in the book. But I think, and this may be my last word here right today, the main the main aim and mission behind this book was to engender a conversation. We believe it's the first time that PAP voices and opposition voices have been included in one book. I think that's so important in this day and age. We talk about political polarization. I hope Singapore never goes down that route. So yes, I do believe it should go. I would not die to fight for that point, but I think the importance of conversations across the political divide is very important today.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even the book launch, Inderjit spoke. Then of course, JJ. Who else did you have?
Man Wai,
Manwai,
Long Man Wai,
yeah, Manwai,
and Paul Tambia.
and Prof Tambaya. So, as I said, past, present, and future NCMPs. Right? Uh, and it's really the way to go, right? To have this, to show that there's far more that unite us than divide us, right? And we all can have a conversation about all these things. Yeah. JJ, did you wanna say anything?
First, I have to thank everyone who have contributed, because this book really had. When we started this book, it was not just about the experiences I went through. In fact, I'm an editor of the book. I included some of my own personal feelings inside and thoughts, but basically it's about how other people thought about it. So we are glad that Mr. Goh Chok Tong allowed his article to be used, and Inderjit gave us an interview, and then of course we interviewed quite a number of the members of the oppositions who gave us some interesting comments, and we interviewed political observers like yourself too, former NMPs too, yeah, so like Eugene. So I think there are a lot of interesting views that gone in, and we basically, yeah, we respect everything that they said. So even when they disagreed with our conclusion, yeah, it went in, and even like Tommy Koh's endorsement basically sounds like it's very much calling for the scheme to remain. Don't remove it. But it's okay. We put it in exactly as it is, word for word. So did some of the endorsements that basically. But it was interesting because usually when you ask for book endorsement and that kind of thing, people will say, "Oh, this is a great book," and so on, blah blah blah. But here we thought that the endorsement itself reflected how people felt after they have read the book, and they says, "No, the scheme must stay," or "No, the scheme must go." That kind of things. I think that this conversation won't stop with just this book, but I think we are on a political journey. Singapore has gone through quite a number of years of political dominance by the PAP, as in total dominance, 100%, and then the NCMP scheme became needed. So, but my own personal feeling is that going forward, the next 40 years, for example, we shouldn't be looking at a scheme like that to build resilience in Singapore political system. We should look at other ways to build that up.
Okay. And I can vouch for it. My views disagreed with the two of them, but I wasn't censored at all. Not a word. So thank you so much. And I think, JJ, this is your second book. Hoyong, is this your third? With the two?
It's been very long because I've edited some books, so yes, you can say it's the third.
Right. Okay. And
Actually, correction, although it's my second book on politics, I've written a book as an academician before on computer science. That was where I came from.
Okay.
I've written some children's book also published by World Scientific.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can feel free to go and search for the World of Science. Go ahead. I should have put some copies behind me, but the second book is out on forces, the first book on energy, and the third book will be on man and environment.
Okay,
So,
wow. I hope you accept that. I mean, no disrespect, but I don't think there's any way I would read those books.
you should. I think your kids should read this. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes, the children's book. Yes. Yeah, but the
Not the computer science one. That was written too long ago.
the science ones, but the children one, yeah, definitely I'll give them a read. But thank you so much. And I think the four books that I'm talking about. So the JJ's Peek into the WP, this one, and Ho Yong's two opposition books. Yes. So which was a bestseller, and Ho Yong's one. I think these are four must-read books for any student of Singapore politics. I think uh, Ho Yong's 2 volumes on the opposition, for me, remains the definitive history of opposition texts in Singapore. I think it's fascinating. When I read them, I couldn't put it down. Thank you so much, both of you. I hope there will be many more. Next one will be on GRC. I'm happy to. I have some time now, so I'm happy to work together. Yeah. So hopefully something, or this won't be your last venture together. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thanks,
Everyone,
Walid.
it's gonna be worth every penny. Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Walid. Thank you.
Bye.